Dr. Matt Henricks. To start with, I guess I'll give a bit of a background of how I was introduced to you and Waterworks. So it was at the CBA grad conference talk where I was introduced to you for the first time, and the Waterworks program, which is something that I was lucky enough to be a part of. Really, I just loved the idea, and I knew I wanted to talk to you. And I tried to track you down right at the end when you were walking out with someone, but I didn't get you in time. So the next day I quickly went through all trying to find your email, and then lucky enough, I found the right email and you responded. So thank you so much for finding the time to come on.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
I guess let's start from the beginning. What did you study at uni? So
I'm
you're
a psychologist.
You're a psychologist by trade. Yeah.
I've got a master's in organizational psychology. So my area of expertise is all about, the psychology of people at work. And my PhD is about attitudes towards change and the malleability of those over time and their relationship with leadership. So interesting kind of area for me, but you start talking about your dissertation, people tend to get lost.
I was going to say, your PhD, right? You do a specific project on something, is that right?
Yeah, it's a large research project, which is all about kind of honing your empirical skills, I guess, to some extent. But the area I was interested in is all about understanding how people respond to change in the workplace, and the extent to which people really are open to change, and whether you can change that level of openness or not over time. Yeah. So
And you're not just a psychologist, obviously.
No.
How did you see? As you've got two programs, from my understanding, Helping Hands and Waterworks.
Yeah.
Could you start with delving into those a bit, and then I'll just pick your brain on them.
Absolutely. So I think the year was 2011, and I'd been running my practice for quite a few years, but I tend to get itchy feet after about sort of 4 or 5 years, like a lot of people. And I was starting to get a bit bored with the consulting work I was doing, and became aware of an amazing program called Helping Hands that was being run in America, and wasn't yet in Australia. And I was really inspired. The program basically makes prosthetic hands and donates those hands to landmine related amputees. And I was so touched by the project and the uniqueness of the design of these hands and how engaging it was as an activity, that I got really excited, and I tried to convince all of my friends that ran team building companies, you've got to get involved in this. You've got to bring this to Australia. You've got to. And so I kept on introducing the founders of the program in America to, person A and person B and person C. And after 6 months of all of these introductions going nowhere, the founder of Helping Hands in America, a guy called Bill John, said, Matt, what are you doing? Why are you not? It's obvious that you've got the passion for this. And it was hard. It was kind of at that moment, I always saw myself as a very analytical person. I didn't see myself as the kind of person that could stand up in front of a stage and run a big event and facilitate big groups. And so I sort of said with trepidation, sure, I'll give it a go, but I still think you'd be better going with all of these other people. And so the rest is history. So Helping Hands, since that time, we've made and donated over 21,000 prosthetics to people in need. Program's been running for over 10 years. Waterworks was really a response to some of the, some of the limitations of Helping Hands. And I launched that in 2015 in April. And I did that because we were looking for another activity. We had all these people that were saying, I had the best experience in my working life doing Helping Hands, and we want to give back in another way. We just don't want to build hands again. And so we wanted one other project. And we thought, well, let's start with all of the biggest problems in the world and see if we can tackle them first. And so, of course, being one of the UN UNHCR sustainability goals, water and sanitation is right up the top of the list. And it's obviously a precursor to educational improvements and poverty alleviation and all that kind of stuff. You can't do much of that if you're not drinking clean and safe water. So So we thought, let's tackle that project. And then the other thing we wanted to do was we really wanted to give great traceability of where your donation goes and get people immediate feedback back. So so that was the other thing we built. We built a website to track all of the donations. But yeah, it's been a bit of a road, but it's been a really exciting one.
Can I ask, so how were you introduced to Helping Hands the first time in America? Were you sitting in a class, or did you just get in contact with someone, or?
Yeah, I just experienced it at a conference and was
Yeah.
quite overwhelmed and moved and thought, why is this not in Australia on a major scale? And so it was, I mean, it's funny, right? Like it feels like an unusual thing, but that's probably a pretty common way for new innovations to make their way over here. They're often done in America first and
Yeah.
brought over here. But yeah, people don't think about it in terms of the world of philanthropy. So yeah, probably unique in that respect.
It's, for me, I was just so amazed. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it's like whatever place is paying you to go speak, and you're using the proceeds of that to set up the, in our case, the water filtration system. And so it's a like a corporate bonding exercise as
Yes.
well as donating
Yeah.
something. So you're doing good as well. So there's the philanthropy aspect. And to me, like, I don't know why, it just blew my mind that it's like you're just combining those two things in such a like smart way.
Yeah.
What
It's
made
smart
you?
until a pandemic comes along.
Yeah, of course. Well, let's go into that. How did that impact everything?
Yeah, it was catastrophic. But here's the thing: there's a couple of different themes to touch on, which might be interesting to your viewers. But I guess to not to labor your point, but you're 100% right. The whole, I guess, if there's a genius behind our projects, the notion is companies all over the world spend enormous amounts of money flying people into various conferences where they spend enormous amounts of money on the venue hire, on the catering, on accommodation, on flights, on just staffing costs for these events. It's huge. And what do you end up walking away from these conferences with? You might get one or two insights that stay with you. You probably get a binder of some sort that goes on your shelf and you never look at it again. And I guess the notion with both of the projects was, well, why don't we try and turn that on its head? Why don't we say, if we're spending all this money to have these amazing, capable people in a room together, let's do something together that's going to make a difference. But also, let's, rather than take something away that we're never looking at again, namely the binder, let's leave something behind. Right? Let's leave a legacy behind that's going to make a difference. So yeah, so we that was kind of the simple notion. And the other notion that's really helped us in that regard was we felt like both projects were too cool to keep to ourselves, and we wanted to give them to the world. And we knew that we could do way more by having an army of people out there building hands and water systems than we could trying to make Matt famous. And so right from the start, we embraced the concept of open source IP, and we give all of the slides that I went through at your event. We give them to any facilitators that want to purchase a kit and use it in their own practice. We do a whole bunch of that. So that's probably the thing I'm most proud of. But then, like you say, you kind of make a choice to go all in on funding your project via corporate events. And that feels really smart until a pandemic comes along and the event industry shuts down.
Yeah.
And so that was challenging. I mean, we bumbled our way through, but I guess the good news was, because both of our entities or projects aren't primarily there to profit, we had plenty of financial reserves around. We weren't, we were able to write it out, and then thankfully the government came to the party as well. But yeah, it was touch and go there. I mean, there was several months where we made no money, but we employed our full team throughout the pandemic because we knew we'd need them out the other end.
Wow.
It was a tricky time.
Are there donation links and like that kind of possibility on the link?
Yeah, I mean, the most natural thing for our projects is to think about, well, is there a way of pivoting that over years term over the last couple of years, but pivoting into a different kind of way of doing things. So we certainly, for Waterworks, we were doing a lot more artwork sponsorships where people weren't physically assembling our kits, but they were doing artworks using shared canvases via Zoom and Teams and the like. And then we were donating or decorating sponsored kits with those artworks. We did similar kind of things with Helping Hands. And both of those things we kind of were able to bumble through with. But I've got to say, it was kind of, I think, part through the good graces of companies that knew how amazing our work was and wanted to support us. I think that was why we kind of managed to get through. I think most people recognize we couldn't go all in on that pivoting like most team building companies did. And all of a sudden they started, facilitating Friday cocktail drinks and things. And these kind of things were very prevalent during the pandemic. And it's like, well, we're not a team building company. We're a company that's really passionate about our two projects. So there's kind of a limit to what we could do. But
have corporate events picked up since?
Absolutely. No, we've had the biggest year since, I guess, this financial year. This is the biggest year. We're on track to have the biggest year we've ever had, which is amazing. So it didn't just came back in a big way.
Yeah. Okay. That's good to know.
I think people wanted to reconnect. I think that, there's a lot of people that are quick to say the world's changing every time something significant happens in the world. And so there's a lot of people saying the world's going to change. We're not going to have CBDs. We're not going to have, no one's going to want to work from the city anymore and things like that. And so I guess we never really bought into that. We always felt like there was some real benefits to people getting together, at least some of the time. And we felt like our projects, if people are working from home more, they probably need our project even more to kind of reconnect and get that creative kind of flow happening in a team environment. So, yeah.
But it is a worry that the loss of, it's ironic because we're talking online, but like if it was an ease factor, I'd prefer to have everything in person. I think there's like a magic to in-person conversation, especially in the workforce. Yes. And that's why there's the need for corporate events, because a lot of people as well, they might, like if you're in a job where you're behind a screen all day and then you're working from home on top of that, and let's say you live by yourself on top of that, you're just constantly by yourself. And it seems like, there's like a lonely crisis potentially underneath all of that. So I think that's another factor that's important for the events, because it's not only what you're donating, but it's also, well, on one aspect, it's like it's making corporates feel good, I guess, because they're doing something that's of use. And it's also that whole team building exercise, team bonding exercise. It's just a great idea. Can I ask?
Absolutely. I mean, and you'll remember one of the things that I always talk about is I always talk about collaboration and silo busting, that kind of stuff in our workshops. And the neat thing is, we can demonstrate, even when we get you all in a room, we can demonstrate that the blinkers end up coming on when you're really passionate about your work, which everyone always is in our projects. When you're really passionate about your work, the blinkers come on and you find yourself just focusing on the widget just in front of you, and you forget that there's 50 other groups in the conference room all focusing on that same problem, and all you need to do is solve the problem once and communicate it. But no one does that, because they're really pumped and proud and wanting to solve it themselves and go home.
Ego as well.
Right? Yeah. So there's all this stuff that feeds into it, and there's nothing bad about what drives those blinkers coming on. It's actually the good in us that prompts it, not the bad. But it's a really interesting observation to note. All right, so we just pulled a whole bunch of people into a room and you still ended up working kind of in isolation a little bit. What does that say about how hard we have to work if we want to collaborate effectively in an online virtual environment? It kind of really magnifies it. It's like, whoa, okay, so if it doesn't automatically happen just because we're in the room together, boy, like we need to work really hard on this. So I don't know. I don't know if anyone's really cracked it, to be honest, but I think we've made a lot of giant strides in the last 2 or 3 years, that's for sure.
Can I ask, so Helping Hands was first, obviously.
Yeah.
What what prompted you really to take that one step further with Waterworks? Because obviously it takes up a lot of time,
Mm.
and you're already making such progress and you can see the results that you're doing. How did you pivot to Waterworks, aside from the fact that water was one of the
Mm.
main things that needed to be dealt with? And also, how did you, from memory, it was Uganda, right? That's where most of the
Yeah.
filters are going. So how
Yeah.
did that get organized and arranged?
Yeah. Well, I guess there's the time and the motivational side of that question. There's also kind of the logistical, how do you actually make it happen kind of side.
Yeah, exactly.
And I mean, I think the motivation was just I've always wanted to make a difference in my work and to kind of look back on my life and be proud of what I've achieved. And so it was kind of a natural thing to me to see this pent up desire to give back among the corporates that we'd worked with. It seemed like a no-brainer to have another activity that was just as powerful and to kind of channel that energy somewhere. Otherwise, it was just going to be lost. I initially, when we were involved in Helping Hands, I kind of had this vague notion that, well, there's a lot of people out there doing philanthropic team building at the moment. It's a really, it's a buzz term a bit. So we've probably got a bit of we should have a community practice around this. I should try and reach out to some of these folk and see if anyone's interested in a monthly meeting and kind of sharing what they're doing so we can refer clients back and forth. And it was interesting because it was stone cold silence when I
I was
reached
about
out to
to
these
say, yeah.
people. And it was really interesting because I think all of those people were running businesses where their primary goal was profit, and they were happening to use philanthropic team building as their kind of means to do that. Whereas we came at it from a different perspective right from the start. And I just felt like, I just felt inspired, I guess, to, okay, well, we not only have we got something unique with Helping Hands, I don't know that there's anyone else out there that's going to tackle this particular issue and do it better than we will. So that was kind of at least me pumping myself up to do it. I guess practically, I at the time, we kind of had to do it in the same way as you do any project. You kind of cordon it off and you come up with a budget and a project plan. And I think it was 6 or 7 months worth of work. Just, how do you eat an elephant? So one bite at a time kind of thing. And you're just slowly working through and putting one foot in front of the other. The probably most significant thing we did was we partnered with an existing charity called Life Water International that's based in the UK, and also has a registration in Uganda. And that just, not only did it kind of mean that we didn't need to worry about the distribution side of what we were doing, but we knew that we were with a partner that had decades of experience and had already made all of the same mistakes that we would make if we tried to start something from scratch. And so we could kind of learn from all of that and avoid making those same mistakes again. And I feel like, from what I've at least seen among young people that start these kind of charities, that's probably the single biggest mistake people make, is they want to make it their own, and ego kind of gets in the way a bit, and all of a sudden they find themselves having to make all of the same mistakes that everyone else that's gone before them has made as well. And I mean, there would still be, don't get me wrong, there's still a benefit in having a tapestry of different approaches to solve some of these big challenges. Water wells are critical. They do not yield perfectly pure water. The water typically needs to be filtered. They also become magnets for crime, because you can only do one water well in, a village or two. And so they create kind of pathways to and from that become magnets for crime. So there's a bunch of, there's a tapestry of different responses. You need a level of diversity in people that are tackling these kind of challenges. But what you don't want to do is just launch on in with nothing but goodwill in your heart and enthusiasm, because you'll kind of burn out really quick.
Yeah, okay. Good to know. With your, I'm assuming it's your psychology background, but there's just like no ego in the way you approach things. It seems like you're just like passing the IP off to everyone. Is that just your psychology background? Is that something you were always born with, or was that kind of like a conscious switch you kind of made? Because it seems like most people, like you said, there's even times where I'm thinking, oh, like I'd want to do something good, blah, blah, blah for myself in the future, give back. And then I think to myself, is it like, do I actually want to give back for good, or do I want my name to be associated and then it's all mine? That kind of
Yeah.
thing, that whole ego aspect to it, which is something
Yeah.
I've like stopped and thought about consciously. For you, is that something just you learned at uni or through your studies or your practice, or have you just always been like that?
It's funny because the Americans gave me the idea. So when we first kind of brought a Helping Hands to Australia, I remember Bill saying something along the lines of, we just got something that's too cool here. We don't want to keep it to ourselves. We want to give it to the world. And so I thought, well, great. Okay, cool. That's a principle I can run with. And I didn't reflect a great deal about it again until in coming months, as things grew, we started to kind of step into what that meant. And it kind of meant, taking a more project style brand that people could run with, I had a business called Henricks Consulting, but consciously choosing not to link that to my consulting house, kind of because we knew that if other people are out there as trainers using our materials, we want them to be really comfortable with a video that has our logo at the end and they don't feel like they're advertising their competitors. We frustratingly, for some of our clients, we don't quote prices on our websites because we don't want to undermine or find ourselves kind of competing with that army of self-facilitators out there. There's a bunch of things that we do that even our American colleagues never did. But for them, that was like, it was an important comment, but I think it was maybe more of a sales pitch to me in talking about our relationship and giving it to me. And I kind of maybe just blew it up into something bigger. But I feel like even though I almost accidentally stumbled upon the principle for Waterworks, it was really critical. So, 5 years later, we've had this kind of luck, so we've had this, not 5 years, probably more like 3 or 4 years. But we've had this luck of Helping Hands going amazingly well, and we're making this big difference. And I was absolutely convinced that kind of that sharing our IP approach was the way to go. And if I'm frank, I mean, yeah, it comes out of a altruism, but I think it comes out of just making good business sense for the work that we're in. Yeah, okay. If the output we're trying to achieve is maximizing the impact that we have, then I can't see any other way of cutting up that cake to maximize our impact anymore, right? I mean, we've done certain things that are also commercially kind of clever. So our tracking system and things probably, and our relationship with Life Water is exclusive. And so there's certain things that make it difficult for people couldn't come and completely replicate what we do without working with us. So we kind of give our IP out freely, knowing that they kind of have to work with us if they want to get involved. And so you could almost look at that and say, well, that's kind of commercially ruthless. But I think that's, once again, one of the mistakes that people sometimes fall into when they're in social enterprise or not-for-profits or NGO kind of worlds. You've got to be just as commercially driven in these projects as you are elsewhere. And I don't draw a wage out of Helping Hands or Waterworks, still haven't. So there's not that kind of imperative when I'm running these businesses, but I am just as focused on dollars and cents as the next guy, because there's no other way to sustainably launch a project, right?
What was your first trip to Uganda like? It's in a refugee camp, right? Where the filtration systems are being delivered. So what was your first trip like going there?
Yeah, it was anxious because I'd signed the deal with Life Water on April 25, I think, 2015, where we'd decided to work exclusively together. At that stage, we'd only met via Zoom, and I flew to the UK and we kind of signed that deal. And then 6 months later, we'd raised enough money to sponsor water for an entire village. And so I was going to a place called Katoma, and I mean, it's kind of anxious. It's one thing to sign sign a contract together in London and shake hands and kind of, you know, come back happy. It's another thing to fly into a country by yourself and hope that someone's there at the front gate to greet you. And so, I mean, it was the first trip leading up to it, a bit anxiety provoking, but I shouldn't have been anxious. I mean, immediately I was embraced by the team that we were already employing at that stage in Uganda. Like, we were old friends. We went to Katoma. We did an amazing work in that particular village. But probably the most striking thing about that first visit to Uganda was my visit to the refugee camp. And that was completely by accident. So we'd done our work in Katoma, and an opportunity to visit a nearby refugee camp came up. And these are people that are fleeing to Uganda from the Congo, Rwanda, South Sudan, these kind of places. And so I kind of went along, and I was tapping myself on the back and saying, oh yeah, what a brave guy. Like, you already conquered your fears by coming to Africa, and now we're going all in. How amazing. And there was a real ego involved. And then as I drove through the gates of the refugee camp for the first time, I felt immediately discombobulated because there were no gates, there were no fences. And you know, when I looked it up later, I kind of realized that Uganda is known as one of the friendliest jurisdictions for refugees. Once they grant amnesty to someone that's seeking refuge there, those people have freedom of mobility and work rights and a whole bunch of stuff that they certainly wouldn't have in Australia. And I realized in this shameful way that irrespective of which side of politics you come from here, we equate refugee camps with detention centres, and they're not the same thing. And so immediately I was discombobulated and feeling a little bit shameful as we drove through these non-existent gates. And then we came across people washing clothes and collecting water and showering all in the same water source, which was basically a big muddy puddle by the side of the road. And then we drove in, and our vehicle was surrounded by all of these happy kids. And I mean, uber happy. And you have not seen joy like you've seen it when you take a photo of a refugee kid and then show them their face in a digital viewfinder. And that's, you know, one of the few times that they've ever seen that, and they're just bouncing off walls with joy and love and laughter. And so immediately, once again, I'm feeling discombobulated. I'm feeling like, oh boy, like, how can these kids be so happy and they've got nothing? They're bathing in the same water that they're drinking from, but yet they're so happy. And my kid at home, meanwhile, is you know, upset if he doesn't get the right Spider-Man action figure. You know, and me, I'm a miserable sod half the time, and I've got everything in the world, right? Like, and so I'm feeling discombobulated and shameful, but I take some photos and I'm feeling excited about that. And then I walk, and then I hear some music. And once again, it's shameful now, but I hear some music, and once again, I'm pumping myself up to be courageous to go and find this music. And I shouldn't have been even remotely fearful, but I guess I was thinking I was being brave. And anyway, some beautiful singing around the corner of this building. And I walk around the corner of the building, and there's all these kids basically singing a dance. They were all doing choreographed movements while they were singing and dancing. And I took a video of that and was, you know, sat with them for a while. And then as we left the refugee camp, I'd noticed that some of these kids had been playing with plastic bottles. They'd fashioned cars, they'd made other toys out of these plastic bottles. And I thought, wow, I wonder if the plastic bottles, the empty ones that are all at my footwell of my car, I wonder if the kids would like these. And I asked my guide, and Stephen said, well, of course, like, it was the stupidest question that anyone had ever asked. And so I kind of, with a bit of trepidation, I wind down my window and I reach out with this 1.5 litre empty bottle, and a kid grabs it and he sprints. And I'm like, oh, well, I was hoping for a better reaction than that, but he sprints off, and then 3 kids chase him down, and they end up in a fist fight over that plastic bottle. And it was, I mean, no one got seriously injured. Someone emerged victorious and jumping around with my plastic bottle. But I didn't give out any more. And I was just in that moment, all of a sudden, it really sunk home, and I realized that these kids were fighting over my rubbish. And prior to that moment, I hadn't given any value. I was frustrated by these plastic bottles that were taking up space in the footwell. I was thinking, why haven't we thrown these out at the last service station? And all of a sudden I had kids fighting over something that I didn't value at all. And so I'm kind of crying, and there's kids still bouncing around happy at this point, and I'm crying, and I'm feeling like the Queen Mother waving as we're driving out, and they're all calling out Mzungu, Mzungu, and I'm smiling and saying goodbye. But tears are welling up. And as we pulled over just after we left the camp, and I asked my interpreter to kind of interpret the songs that the kids were singing, that song that I kind of went around the corner of the building to hear. And he explained that there were two songs. One song was a welcome song. So effectively, they were too humble to go and set up shop right in front of me and to perform their song for me. They wanted to make sure that I wanted to hear their music. And so they did it around the back of that building. And if I didn't go to them, I would never have heard that song. And second, the song they sung was, "We have nothing, but we have everything because we have hope." And I've got to say, those translations aren't necessarily perfect, because the interpreter explained that all of these kids come speaking different languages, that almost a pidgin refugee kid language all of its own emerges in those kind of communities. And so it's actually really difficult to accurately interpret these songs. But once again, the waterworks flowed for me, pardon the pun, because I just, okay, there's these kids fighting over my rubbish. There's these kids that are basically just, have nothing, but approaching their life with a level of energy and vivaciousness just because they have hope. And so in that moment, we had already committed in that signed document, I'd committed with Life Water that we would sponsor 13 different villages. And so we had to kind of get a wriggle on and do that and fulfill that commitment. But in that moment, I started talking to Life Water about rechanneling all of our energy after that to focusing on this camp. And so fast forward now, if that camp had not grown since that very first day, every household would now have a water system because of waterworks. It's just the fact that it's grown quite dramatically with different conflicts in the Congo and the like. So, but we're at least at about 70 or 80% of households in that refugee camp now, and we're kind of doubling down and trying to accelerate now that we're out of the pandemic. So, yeah.
That's amazing. That's really amazing.
Thanks.
Wow. And how many times have you been since, I guess? And
5.
Have you been 5?
5. And it's kind of a different experience each time.
Each time.
It's amazing.
Wow. Far out. I don't even know what to say, to be honest.
Well, it's worth doing anytime anyone gets a chance. People wonder about safety in these kind of places, and what I'm told is a really good rule of thumb is to never travel during elections, that people get passionate about elections and violence erupts really quickly and things. So I never travel during election time. I'm always with my team, more or less throughout our trip, and that team I trust with my life. And yeah, it's but I think you kind of learn different things each time. I've now had the pleasure of being able to escort others on trips and kind of see the sort of the journey that they go on, and kind of recognize that some of the stuff is some of the stuff that you're drawn to is common and others unique. Everyone gets drawn to the kids that first trip. And then as you kind of go back the second, third, fourth time, you become much more interested in understanding, well, what are the systematic influences that stop these countries kind of lifting living standards and kind of gradually getting increasing, alleviating poverty, increasing education, that kind of stuff. And that's the stuff that I've been more, I guess, drawn to of late during trips. But I mean, it's also amazing in recent trips to see how certain team members from our African employees, because we now employ about 9 people in Uganda, and it's been so amazing to see them blossoming and you know, certain team members stepping into their own kind of their own authority and skill set and doing some amazing things. So that's the kind of reason I go there nowadays.
Can I ask as well?
Yep.
Do you, in terms of, well, first of all, I want to say, like, the people say they're going to do a lot of things, but you're actually doing those things. So I think that that's amazing, and that deserves recognition.
Thank you.
In terms of, so you've got Helping Hands, you've got Waterworks. Do you foresee anything else that you touch on, like a third kind of
No, I mean,
program?
if I'm pretty honest, I'm kind of too thinly stretched already.
Stretched thin, yeah.
So right now, I feel like that's all we're focused on. I think there's been a real focus that's come. I mean, it's obvious, but there's a real focus that comes from choosing to be really good at maximizing our impact via one of two, you know, by either of those projects, and you get a certain focus around what's important and what's not, and it would be really hard, I imagine, to keep the momentum of both of those projects going whilst also dabbling in a third. I think if we're set up to make more profit than we do, and kind of employ more people as a result of that, then maybe that stuff would become more possible. But I've got to say, I'm a psychologist. I never wanted to be a leader of a great big team. and kind of building scale. So we do as much as we can, and I think the scale of what we've done has been pretty extraordinary. But I think there's kind of a limit to what I'm wanting to pursue at this stage. Yeah. Yeah.
One last question I'll ask.
Yeah,
With Helping Hands,
yeah.
where is the area that you're mostly donating the hands to? Because I'm not as familiar.
Yeah, absolutely. We're in over 100 countries around the world now. We're partnered with a charity in that space called the Ellen Meadows Prosthetic Hand Foundation. And that foundation was kind of a living memorial to a guy called Ernie Meadows' daughter, who he lost tragically in a car accident. And he was an engineer, and he was looking for service projects that would live on in her name. And so that's why it's called the Ellen Meadows Foundation, because her name was Ellen. And the hand is called the LN4 because it was the 4th service project he tried. And it's the only one, as far as I know, it's the only one still in operation. And so the beauty of Helping Hands is we've been able to leverage the enormous goodwill that the Ellen Meadows Foundation has created. We leverage all of their distribution networks, and they've got hundreds of hand ambassadors all around the world. And there's a real diversity around where these go. So they might go to places. There's lots of hands that go into Bangalore, India. Bangalore is not landmine impacted. There's people there that are generally high voltage electrical accidents and things that need our hands. Then there's other areas like, Cambodia, Laos, etc., that have probably a higher prevalence of landmine related amputees. Effectively, we help anyone that needs a hand that couldn't afford one otherwise, and we just focus on building as many hands as we can, knowing that the Ellen Meadows Foundation will then kind of channel into people in need. But McKinsey's did a pro bono consulting piece of work for us at one point, and their estimate was that there were between 2 to 3 million people in need of that would benefit from the hands that we make. And so that's kind of there's a massive need out there. And during the pandemic, because events were much lower, we've kind of built up a bit of a waiting list. So there's about 3,000 people on our waiting list that need our hands right now that we're kind of tackling. So we'll get there. We'll get there one day, but we're just doing our best.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for the time, and
Thanks,
thank you for giving me a bit of insight and agreeing to chat. I guess
Awesome.
I loved sitting and in the Waterworks program. It really did move me, and I'm so thankful that I was able to chat with you as well
Thanks so
afterwards to
much,
get a
Dylan.
deeper insight. So I appreciate it very much.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks, man.